I think it's time we talked about the mutual use of agreed-upon signifiers in order to portray something to another person, or in other words, language, or in other words, words. There are numerous linguistic walls preventing the actual discussion of ideas. Not all of these mortared barriers are rooted exclusively within a flat-out disservice to language itself. For example, if you're an entitled social justice fanatic, you can halt ideas from being discussed simply due to the race of a specific person. A recent incident of such buffoonery was captured at San Francisco State University, where a white student was maligned by two other people for cultural appropriation, but in layman's terms, wearing a hairstyle they thought was inappropriate. Let's watch and we'll get to the analysis directly after.
You're saying that I can't have a hairstyle because of your culture? Why?
Because it's my culture. You know what boss means.
Do you know it was in Egyptian culture? Are you Egyptian? Nah, bro, you're not.
Are you Egyptian?
No, but it doesn't matter.
Wait, where's Egypt? Tell me.
You know what, girl?
Where's Egypt?
Dude, go. You have no right to tell me what I can not wear. Huh?
Where's Egypt?
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now.
Yo, girl, stop touching me right now. Come back.
Get off of me.
Come back, come back, come back. You put your hands on me, we'll learn.
Well, what? Like, you're gonna make some shit because of what the hair I have? That's no reason, yo. I don't need your disrespect. I don't need your disrespect.
Why are you filming this?
Just for everyone's safety.
So as we can see, according to the video, we have a completely innocent person being pestered, grabbed, and bullied for cultural appropriation. A person with a reasonable brain would think something along the lines of, what right does anyone have bullying other people over hairstyles? Well, the short answer is, they don't. But the long-form answer is, historically, cultures that are made up of people of color have been downtrodden and oppressed by people not of color. These established power systems hurt minority groups. People in privileged positions who appropriate the culture of those minority groups are perpetuating the erasure of POC identity and adopting it within their own identity, which is simply another manifestation of that oppression inflicted upon minority groups and therefore should be actively discouraged. If it wasn't already plainly obvious, that long-form answer was not meant to clarify or even meant to be understood. It was intended to obscure further so that people who don't readily accept this claim can be dismissed as uneducated. When in reality, if you understand all of these terms and how they mesh together, it can be boiled down to, in layman's terms, I'm black, you're white, therefore I get to tell you what you can and can't wear. But if it were said in that very blunt and direct language, it would be rightfully deemed as crazy by most people. Just a quick aside, if this woman truly thought she was righteously battling improper behavior in this video, why did she get so angry regarding being filmed? And why did she feel the need to swat someone's camera? The woman in the video did not give that long-form answer that I gave, but that's what a defense of this action would probably look like. The title of the video we just watched specifies that this was an employee of the university, but I haven't seen anything proving that just yet. And don't think you're off the hook, guy with the flat top. You agreed with this woman and then just watched it go on with a big old smile on your face. There comes a point in time when it doesn't matter what in the world your claims are. To draw a parallel, let's say I was in an argument with a feminist at my college. We were really having it out in the hallway, and I had them up against the ropes, metaphorically. When this feminist realized they were losing, they said, whatever, I don't have time for this crap anymore, I'm leaving. And then I grabbed them and said, no, you're not leaving, get back here, we aren't done yet. It doesn't matter how correct I was in my argument, I just crossed a very disgusting line. What a lot of people fail to realize is, you can be a bully and still be factually correct. And being factually correct does not negate your bullying behavior. However, being factually correct and pressing someone on it is not bullying. Just don't resort to actual violence over disagreement and we have no problems. You'll get why I use the term actual later. Anyway, bringing it all back to language, let's examine the term cultural appropriation for a few moments. The reason the term cultural appropriation is used as opposed to wearing something I disapprove of, is because of the sheer idiocy of the claim. I obviously can't read the minds of others, but I have a strong feeling that they know it's a ridiculous claim. Using the term cultural appropriation is an obvious effort to allow the action of wearing something someone else doesn't approve of be perceived as some sort of harmful action against the offendee. What sounds more reasonable to people unfamiliar with these kinds of issues? I didn't appreciate this privileged person's explicit cultural appropriation, or I didn't appreciate a white guy wearing traditionally black hairstyles. Obviously the first, but they both portray the exact same idea. One of them is simply couched in fluffy euphemism. I'm sure all of you have seen this video by now, but let's examine another video where one person is being honest but still idiotic with their claims, while another is being explicitly dishonest.
Y'all racist. This 2016, not 1916. The good old white days are over with. The good old white days are over with. Ain't no more of them days, bruh. It's over.
That's not
the good
racist.
old, no,
I'm
that's telling the
racist,
truth.
though.
That's
I'm
telling the
racist.
truth.
That's not racist. I'm racist.
Hell no, that's not racist. That's telling the
You've
truth.
never experienced
That's
oppression
telling
in
the
your
truth.
entire fucking life. Neither have I.
You don't know me.
You're fucking a white male.
So?
You're a white man.
White people don't know what it's like to be poor.
That's right. Bullshit.
That's what Bernie Sanders said.
Okay, here we go. What's your name? What's your name, sir? Where are you from? What
from
neighborhood in Chicago are you from? What neighborhood are you from?
Gosh, I wish someone could come save me right now from you.
Right, well,
I wish
nobody
someone
has
could
to
come
save you
save me.
because you're a fucking white man who gets to do whatever he wants to in this space, right?
Okay.
So I'm saying, no, you do not have permission to walk around videotaping women of color and acting like you can do that and the rest of us can't. Aren't you quite aware by holding that video camera on me that you are surrounded by your privilege, right? Take your privilege somewhere else, please. All right? Because your privilege is not welcome here. So unless you are here to dismantle your privilege, please find somewhere else to go.
While one of them is actually honest with their beliefs, namely, you're fucking a white man, another is not when they say, take your privilege somewhere else, please. The latter statement being a barely clever euphemism for, we don't like your kind around here, whitey, even though I'm white, but totally ignore that though. Honesty is commendable, but his beliefs are obviously not. This is why being crystal clear and honest about a position you hold is necessary for an argument to even take place. For example, using these terms, there's sort of a forced disconnect between necessarily connected ideas. For example, imagine this argument between two people. Sorry, we don't allow people in privileged positions at this meeting, thank you. Wait, so you don't allow white men at this meeting? Not necessarily, just people in privileged positions, such as yourself. Well, I'm white and male. Does that put me in a privileged position? Yes, it does. Okay, then you're excluding me based on my race and sex. Of course not. I'm excluding you based on your position of relative privilege. Everyone can see the bizarre word trickery here, right? His position of privilege is based on his race and sex, but that disconnect is forced in order to not appear racist and sexist in a very obvious way by simply stating, we don't allow white men, sorry. Words in this case have completely diluted what is actually going on. This is what being dishonest with words looks like in practice, clouding the actual meaning and intent behind a statement or action with childish nonsense. It's like saying you never called someone short, you just called them deficient in the height department. They both mean the same thing, but people concerned with PR would prefer you say the latter. But while there are times that idiotic and evil statements are clouded through euphemism, there are also times where innocuous and harmless behavior is hyped as worse than it actually is through language. We saw this type of thing with UN's report on cyber violence. Violence, to nearly everyone who uses the English language, necessitates physical contact. In reality, something is either cyber or it is violence. There is no light between these two things, unless you count something like remotely detonating a bomb or something, in which case stop being pedantic, something else we'll get to. However, if you look a little closer at this proposition, you will notice the sheer amount of malice behind that word destruction. Take my moral statement from earlier. Just don't resort to actual violence over disagreement and we have no problems. Now imagine that disagreement in a manner that displeases you is now considered violence. That proposition makes no sense now. Don't resort to violence over violence. I tend to sigh the most heavily when people claim they're being attacked on social media. I understand the need for certain terms, but terms used in that fashion make it seem like something more serious. I wouldn't mind the phrase people getting on my case, I'm getting nagged on social media, or terms like pestered or annoyed, but that may just be a personal pet peeve of mine. I positively adore language, so when I see it being torn apart like this, it breaks my heart. By the way, that doesn't mean my heart has actually ruptured or fractured in any way. I love learning new words, what they mean, and how I can use them. I love when language is used creatively to make a point, and sometimes that can drive home a point a lot stronger. I don't even care if someone invents a brand new word that everyone immediately understands, based on context clues, in order to make a point. It's when somebody writes in new meaning to a word that nobody understands in order to win an argument, where I get slightly perturbed. This is what is called playing the definition game, and there are a few common examples to be discussed. The most obvious one that comes to mind is the racism equals power plus prejudice argument. If someone makes the claim white people can't be racist, everyone rightfully cackles at the irony. But if someone is operating under the definition that racism requires institutional backing, and prejudice does not, they have in their mind successfully rationally justified the use of a euphemism. They actively exclude things that were encompassed by that word before they came along. There are also examples of people including things within definitions that previously were not there in order to justify falsehoods. For example, citing attempted rape or the act of having sex while intoxicated is rape itself. It allows one to bolster statistics and make the world seem scarier than it actually is for, if we're being honest, power over others. And now, and this is where things get a bit crazier than before within the definition game, but sometimes a word can have two separate definitions. But someone will insist that you were using the term in one sense of the definition as opposed to the one you claimed you were using. The thing about language is that it is fluid. If you refuse to accept someone's clarification when it is reasonable, and insist that you know what they truly meant by something, you're building an unnecessary wall between yourself and your opponent. But if the clarification consists of, "I never said that," when they actually did say that thing, then there's very clearly a whole different problem you need to deal with. It is very difficult to describe what is and isn't proper language use, considering it varies from person to person, argument to argument. But all of the previous examples are barriers to discussing the actual ideas. If you can't figure out what the hell you're talking about, if you prevent the other person from knowing what the hell you're talking about, or if you feign not knowing what someone else is talking about, then you are a contributor to the destruction of language itself. If anything, you should be attempting to let your opponent in on your positions and mental state as honestly and simply as you possibly can. But I've noticed that the meanings of very simple and commonly accepted words are being conveniently forgotten in order to push an agenda. Looking facts in the face is not a very common skill, nor is it even commonly cared about. People are off doing their own things, raising families, aspiring for careers, and just trying to survive. But looking facts in the face is at least necessary for some in order for the world to be made sense of. And all of this nonsense with words is designed to allow the perpetrators to effectively ignore those facts, or soften the blow of those facts, that bump up against their ideology, obviously. When the enemy does it, it's murder. When they do it, it's simply the removal of vital bodily fluids from the sentient organism via multiple lacerations to the sternum. When the enemy does it, it's racism. When they do it, it's opposing social power structures that benefit the unfairly privileged. This is why it's important to boil people down to their base assertions. And if they won't admit their base assertions, then they very clearly have a mental block. However, it's a risk, boiling people down to their base assertions, because that opens up their actual value system. And not many of those people who refuse to admit their position like to see that. To bring this full circle, look at the face of the woman from the first video I showed you. She's smiling, smug, and as carefree as a spring dove. Until she finds out she's being recorded. She was blissfully living in her own little fantasy world where her actions were justified because of race, until her virtual reality was yanked from her via the unbiased lens. It was at this precise moment that she knew what she had done wrong, and the moment she swatted the camera away was an attempt to smack away what she knows about herself, that she's an awful human being. And now the whole world knows it. The same with the people who play these word games if you lead them down the path of their own feigned ignorance. It ends in a very pitiful event where someone sees themselves in the mirror, stripped of all of their fluffy outer appearance, and they see the monster within. Then, even though they're looking directly at themselves, claim that everyone except themselves are in the mirror. P.S. For the pedants, no actual mirrors are involved and no one's actually wearing literal disguises. Have a wonderful day.